Hello, everybody, and welcome to Preparing and Writing Grants and Proposals, Part 2 of a two-part training on fundraising. It'll be presented by the New Mexico Allies for Advocacy, Inc. in partnership with Southwest Alliance. Today is August 2nd, and here we go. The Southwest Alliance is in its third year, and the goals of the project are to share information from state to state about self-advocacy, create video blogs about disability issues, lead webinars about strengthening self-advocacy organizations, and work on sustainability and recruiting youth leaders.
So the New Mexico team is made up of a number of people. Not everyone who's on our team is on this slide, but we're going to introduce who is here today providing you with this exciting webinar. So I'm Nat Dean. I'm the first one on the left, and I'm a disability advocate. I'm a traumatic brain injury survivor, and I have in the photograph, which is me, I have on part of my knee my beige Labradoodle service dog, whose name is Tommy. Lindsay?
And this is Lindsay, and I'm the middle picture. I'm sitting on a bench in San Rafael, California, which was lovely. And sitting next to me is my yellow lab guide dog. Her name is Astra. I am also a disability advocate. I also work at the Center for Self-Advocacy.
And my name is Daniel Ekman, and you'll see a picture of me on the right. And the little guy that's with me is my 15-month-old son, Elias. So I think I'm more of a service help to him, as opposed to he kind of leads and I follow. My job when I'm not raising him is I work for the Center for Self-Advocacy as the program manager, and I work on various projects, one of which is New Mexico Allies for Advocacy as the president of the board.
Thank you. Next slide. Lindsay, take it away.
All right. So since this is a two-part training, we're going to operate under the assumption that you all have either heard our previous training or can access it later. So our previous training was on how to locate grants. So now that you've found a funder or donor whose mission matches your project idea, what do you do next? And that is, it's time to write your proposal or your grant application. And the picture on the right side is of a yellow legal pad on a clipboard. Next slide, please.
So now we get to our first poll question, which is, have you ever asked for anything using a proposal or a grant application? Yes or no? And the picture in this case is a change purse with a whole lot of change in it. And with most grants, it's more than just a little bit of change. So this will be a good way to see where we're at.
So you'll see a window on your screen that asks you to answer yes or no, and then underneath that is a button to submit your answer. And people who are listening to this as it's archived or recorded, you won't be able to participate in the poll questions.
But it's still a good question to ask yourself, because it'll give you a good starting point for some of the things we'll be talking about.
So we have Teresa helping us out today, and can she give us the results of the poll?
Okay, so the poll answered 83% said yes and 17% said no.
Well, we have a pretty good number of people who have, and you can see on your screen in front of you the bar that says how many said yes and how many said no, or the quantity. So it sounds like a lot of you have done this before, and we hope that today we can help you understand ways to even strengthen them and make them better and get better results. Can we go to the next slide? For those of you who have not done a project proposal or a grant, we're trying to explain it in simple terms, and we hope that you'll find some nuggets of information to help you along your way. So what is a project proposal? A project proposal usually is similar to a grant application, which can be very extensive, but it's a less formal outline of your project or event that makes a more direct request for smaller funding amounts or in-kind donations. And in-kind donations, you'll hear that term coming up multiple times in our presentation today, and we have a larger explanation of it in part 1, which is called Friendraising and Fundraising, how to research opportunities for funding. And you can look at that online, and we'll give you the link later. It's also on YouTube for those of you that need closed captioning. An in-kind donation is, for instance, you have an event and you want to have food at that event, and someone doesn't give you the money to buy the food, but say it's Subway, and they give you sandwiches to be able to serve at your event. That would be considered an in-kind donation. Next slide. What is a grant application? So a grant application usually is much more detailed and written description of the planning, how you're going to do your event, the timeline, and the delivery plan for your program or project, including a budget that's much more detailed and how you will be evaluating your outcomes. Your evaluations are usually something where someone fills out a form. Did you like this? Did you not like this? It may be also what is sometimes called an exit interview, that when someone's leaving the event, they ask you, was this helpful to you? Did you enjoy it? Did you learn? What was the new thing that you learned? So evaluating your outcomes are how well did you do? What did you accomplish? And were you successful at it? Next slide, please.
All right, so let's start with the easier one, and that would be a project proposal. And picture on the right is an easy button from Staples, and it is being pressed by I'm going to say it's a yellow lab dog paw. I'm pretty sure Astra would do that if I asked her to. Next slide, please.
Okay. So now we have our proposal puzzle pieces. Before you even sit down to write, you have a first step. The first step is making personal contact with a possible donor. This is your friend raising. That's important. The second step is to promptly follow up with your proposal. So again, before even writing anything down, make sure to contact the possible donor, get to know them, and follow some of the steps that were brought up again in part 1 of this 2-part presentation. Next slide.
Next
please.
slide, please. We're doing the webinar in different almost chapters. And so this chapter is about proposal puzzle pieces, which you'll have a heading at the beginning of each slide. We have a little illustration of a yellow, a turquoise, a red, and a green puzzle piece fitting together, but the green one is trying to fit in. So that's what we're trying to do, is help you put the puzzle pieces together. So you need to, this is a much simpler way of asking for something. It's not multiple pages. You may not be responding to a form or filling out a form. You may just be approaching someone and saying, can you help us with this? Or they may say to you, write us a proposal and then we'll see what we think about it. And then if we like it, we'll give you the grant application. Sometimes that happens. So for a proposal, you would use a letter or a memo format. You know what a letter is, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. A memo format we'll show you an example of in a minute. Then you would address it to the potential funder, wherever you're going to Target, to Subway, to an agency like the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, whoever you're going to, and you have their name, their address, their phone number, all the information to connect with them. Then you would include your address and all contact information, the same thing. They need to be able to email you, write to you, call you, or fax you. If you don't have a fax, that's okay. You would include your address, all the contact information, and the very important thing here is the point person. A point person is within your group who's going to take on the role of having the all the information and be able to answer their phone or respond to an email or receive a fax. Then you need to include the date of submission, which is when are you giving it to them so that they have a reference point. Next slide, please. We're waiting for the next slide, and it's going to show, here it is. In a sample memo format, I'm trying to show you just a little bit of what the top of the page looks like in a project proposal. You don't have to follow this exact design, but this is a project proposal that I made and was successful in receiving the funding for it. So it says at the top in capital italic letters that are bold, project proposal. Underneath that, and that's centered, is in bold, in quotations, which I chose to use, legislative advocacy / self-advocacy clipboard advocacy tool. And it says 2017, the 5th edition, and that's because this was, amazingly enough, my request for them to fund it for the 5th year. So for 5 years, I received funding for this project. So on the left, it says 2 in capital letters, and then indented over is the name, the email, the name of the agency, the address, the city and state and zip, and the phone number for the office of where I was sending this. The next segment says from in capital letters on the left, and then spaced over is my name, my email, my title, and I'm not with a company or an agency. I call myself a disability advocate and a self-advocate. My address, my city, state, zip, my phone number, and also my fax. And then I have the date that I submitted it, and there's a line underneath that in bold. And then underneath that it says part 1, the project description. And we'll be giving you what needs to go into a project proposal as we go through the next several slides. So that's just an example of the top of a page of a project proposal. Next slide, please.
So more proposal puzzle pieces. In 1 to 4 pages, you need to include the project title, which you saw on the previous slide. You also need to include an abstract, and an abstract is a brief project description, not super detailed. You can get into the details later on in the proposal. In this abstract, a mission statement may be included if appropriate, and we defined a mission statement in our previous webinar, but basically a mission statement is saying what your plan is for your project. Also, you need to include who will do the project and what their qualifications are. Next slide, please. You need to also describe what is the event or the product that you're baking or putting on, when will it happen or be produced, where it will happen, how it will be delivered, and who will it be delivered to. Next slide, please. All right, describe why this particular project is important. What's the point of your project or your product? Who needs that project or product? What the impact will be. And then you will provide a conclusion, or this could be a wrap-up statement. And you can also include an evaluation process, again, if it's appropriate. Next slide, please.
Okay, so what are some other puzzle pieces? We never talked about in-kind, and that would come up again. List what in-kind goods or services you need. Again, you'd be surprised how many times a company might not be able to offer you money, but there's something they can offer you that's just as valuable that you really need and that only they can provide in some cases. List the dollar amounts in detail of what funds you need. If they're making a commitment to you in a proposal, they're going to want to know what the money is being used for, and indicate if there are any other funding sources or sources funding the project or event and those amounts. This is important because if you're putting on a big event, or if it's a little bit of a larger proposal, an organization will feel more comfortable supporting you if you have other sources of funding, because they'll feel like there's other people that can help keep the project going. Now, it's not a requirement, but it's strongly recommended that in any case, you don't rely just on one source of funding. Next slide, please.
So in a document like this, which may be 1 page, it could be 2 pages, 3 pages, you don't want to go too much longer than that, it may be appropriate to include a signature line with the dates of when someone signed it to finalize that both parties, and there may be 2 or 3 parties of people, are committed to completing what has been promised. It's very important that if you're having someone's donated you a bouncy house for your carnival, they're giving you that without charging you, that bouncy house is going to be there if you say it's going to be there. So having a contract can really help make it more formal and know that this thing that you've committed to is being committed to by someone else, and you'll have a successful event. This element makes your proposal actually a contract. So that can be an important component. And at the end of our presentation, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you hold your questions till the end, that'd be great. Next slide, please.
With your newfound skills about proposals, let's graduate to grant applications. And we have a picture of a student in graduation robes and cap, and she's got a diploma in her hand that she's kind of holding over her head, so she looks pretty excited. And we are too. Next slide, please.
She's jumping up and down for the joy of learning about proposals. So we're going to talk now about navigating grant applications, and we kind of like to think of it as navigating something because we're finding our way through a maze of questions that we have to answer to pull together how do we explain to someone what we want them to know to give us the funding. And our graphic in the upper right-hand corner for this chapter of our presentation is a GPS screen with a map on it telling someone where they need to go and how fast they need to go to get there, how fast they're going at the moment with their address. So that's kind of a fun one. So the first step is to research grant opportunities that match your mission and your program. And your mission is really, what does your organization stand for? A grant application is usually much more complex. It usually has a form, and you're going to be required to provide a lot of information that substantiates or proves that you're the strongest candidate for these funds. It's also a larger amount of money and a bigger commitment on both sides. And your program would be, what is it that you want to do? And we'll talk about that more as we go. The second step is to very carefully understand their application processes and procedures to learn exactly what you'll need to provide. Because if you don't give them what they want, they're not going to consider you. And it's a pretty formal process. Next slide, please.
So something that's super, super important during this process is you need to find out the due date for applying for your particular grant, and do not be late. There's no such thing as turning it in a day late and getting half credit. If you don't turn it in on time, you're not going to be considered during that cycle. So give yourself lots of time to prepare. You must be extremely accurate and give lots of attention to detail. Don't cut corners or make guesses. And this is super important for especially dollar amounts. If you say you think you need $50 and you actually need 75, that's not going to work so well for you. Always, always, always follow the format of the grant application to a T every single time. Because again, if you're sloppy, you're probably not going to get the funding because the funder's not going to feel like you know what you're doing as a person or an organization. Next slide, please. If you have questions while working on your application, contact the funder for clarification. And this is really important because it also shows the funder that you really care about getting their money. It sounds really bad, but you really care, and it shows them that you are trying to do everything correctly instead of just throwing it together last minute. If it appears that your mission does not meet their mission, don't waste your time or theirs. There are other fish to fry. Next slide, please.
So next up, we have a picture of a clipboard, which is appropriate for our second poll question. Right now, can you think of anyone whose mission matches yours? And again, you have the yes or no circles you can click on and then hit submit for the quick poll. And just as an aside, it is a very good idea to write down your mission and discuss your mission with all the people in your organization to make sure it is as clear as possible.
So you'll see a screen in front of you that asks a quick poll question and a choice to say yes or no, and then a button at the bottom that says submit, and click on that and then we'll know what your answers are. And Teresa will tell us what she discovers about this group when the poll answers have all been submitted.
It is 100% so far, and looks like we have a yes.
Yay! That means you guys are going to be in good shape to start asking people to support what you do, using the newfound skills or the skills you already know, and maybe learning a few new nuggets of information. Next slide. We've got the next slide, please.
So now, application components, and we have a picture of Legos that are stuck together and that are being built. And grant application is very much like building a tower of Legos. You need to have everything in the right place. Grant applications are made up of many components which will build your case to a potential funder. Your job is to convince them that you are the best choice for the task at hand. Grants are competitive. There's more than one organization trying to show the funder that they can do a great job fulfilling the needs that the funder has. What you have to do is to show them, this is why the Lego tower that I built is going to be better than the Lego towers that the other people are going to build. So always remember your mission and remember what they're asking for, because you're trying to convince them that you're the best person for the job that they want, not just any job. Next slide, please.
So in your application components, component being each item that you need to include to build the whole picture, you have first a proposal summary. We talked about proposals, and that was like a style of making a shorter request for something smaller, but we're just going to use the word proposal here as, again, what sort of similar to what you did in your first exercise. to begin to help someone meet you and understand what you're doing. So typically in a grant application, you'll have a proposal summary, which is a short description of your project. In this instance of a grant, you almost always have to provide your mission statement. And the mission statement needs to be very carefully crafted, very short, one sentence that says exactly what you're there for, exactly what the purpose of your organization is, and exactly why you are doing that. Then state your unmet need and how you'll meet that need and the resulting benefits. An unmet need is a community doesn't have a place for people to hang out who have disabilities who need to socialize with other people and do fun things. So that's sometimes called the clubhouse model. So if there isn't a clubhouse, we need $500,000 to put together a clubhouse, to get a building, to sign a lease, to pay for that lease for a year, to renovate it, and then you're going to start looking for additional funding to keep that going for a long period of time. And when Daniel talked about having more than one funder, that would be a really great opportunity to say, and we're approaching, say, United Way for longer term funding. So you need to state the need, how you're going to meet that need and the resulting benefits. So how you would meet the need is what kind of programming will you be putting into place to accomplish what you're saying you're going to do, and how would it be beneficial to the community, or how would it be beneficial to what group. Then you need to give the time frame. This project will last for 1 year. This project will go on for 5 years. We're asking for funding for the first year as seed funding. Seed funding is how you get started. And then what your total cost is. This is not the place where you put your whole budget. Next slide, please. So the next slide of application components with our Legos is organizational capability. What organizational capability is this is where you sell yourself and establish your credibility. Are you the best one for the job? Have you had a good track record? Have you succeeded at things like this before? Do the people that are providing the services within this grant, do they have the resumes to support it? What have they done in the past? And you're going to include their resumes in your attachments, which will be described later. So you would describe your organization, your goals, your successes, and prior support, or support you have received in the past, because that gives you a really good track record. And typically for big grants, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars, you have to be a successful organization that's been functioning for about 3 years, or sometimes shorter, but sometimes even longer. If they're going to be giving you a lot of money, you need to have show the capacity to be able to manage that. Then you would give evidence of how well your organization has managed money in the past. Next slide, please.
So your next application component, or your next Lego, is you need to state the problem or need that you are trying to fix or solve. So outline the specifics of your project and make a logical connection between your organization and the problem that you are intending to solve. So again, why are you the best person or organization to do this project or create this product? And you can support this with documentation of your past successes. And this can be posters from previous events that you've held. It can be pictures of or actual previous products that you have made in the past that were successful. And these can be these are generally called appendices, and they can go in the back of your grant application. Next slide, please. And concerning documentation, to support applications, keep at least 100 samples. And this is just kind of a general rule. There's no like rule book that says you have to keep 100, and if you keep 99, then you fail. But 100 samples of materials and lots of photos, even of meetings, pictures are worth 1,000 words, and examples of your success are crucial in showing your potential funder that you've been successful before and that you are worthy of their funds. And yeah, samples will go in as appendices in the back of your application. Next slide, please.
So further on with application components, I want to just say a couple words about documentation. Samples can be a postcard you sent out, a flyer, a poster, and if you have a great big poster, you can take it, reduce it to a smaller size and then write on it, this was a 3-foot by 4-foot poster. You can have if you do an information table at a conference, take a picture of the information table with your big banner and people standing in front of it and looking very interested. Or if you had a bouncy house at your carnival, that you do a carnival every year and pictures of the different things you've done, you're creating knowledge and you're dating these people. You want them to marry you. So you want to show them, what they're going to get when they join on and become a member of your team. So in your application components, you'll have next program objectives or results. So your objectives are what do you want to accomplish, and your results are when you are doing these different activities, what will the result of them be? So when you put that together, you'll call that your scope of work. A scope of work states specific, be exact, and measurable, something that you can say, we invited 500 people and 100 people came. That's a pretty good response rate to an invitation to an event. So state specific and measurable intended results that your program or your project will deliver to solve the problem or need. This is where, if you said earlier, we put on a successful carnival every year that brings in 500 people, which is a large part of our community, and the results, and people love this event, and it brings people together, and what happens after that? People are connected and relationships continue. Next slide, please. So we still are in our Lego blocks, we're still building. You then put in your monitoring and evaluation. You'll indicate how you will regularly track your progress toward your goals. We need to evaluate as we move along through our project and show them how we're going to do that. And then describe what methods you'll use to evaluate whether you have achieved your objectives. In some situations, it may be a one-day event, a 3-day conference, and you have evaluation at the end from everyone. It may be for each breakout session at your conference that you have an evaluation form for each session. Then you can say how successful your speakers are. So an important component of this is when you do your event or project, make sure people fill out the evaluation forms, because if you have 500 people and you get back 3 evaluation forms, not going to work. So it might be that you have when you turn in your evaluation, they include their email, and then you email them and they want a prize. That's like a tempting reward for getting someone to fill it out. If the clipboard project that we showed an example of at the beginning of a project proposal before, when I give out the clipboards, I hold one up, I hold up an evaluation, I'd say, you can't have one of these unless you fill out one of these. And then at the end of the presentation, I have someone walk around the room and get the evaluations back from people who have the clipboards in their hands. So next slide, please. Take it away, Daniel.
Yep. So future needs and other necessary funding. You built this thing out of Legos. You have the plan. Nobody wants to fund a plan where you do something for a short amount of time and then, to use an analogy I understand, the 15-month-old comes along, tears all the Lego blocks apart, you're left with a pile of Legos, and you're starting all over again. You need to describe how you'll continue after the grant award runs out. That is becoming something that all organizations that give out grants will actually score as a part of how they decide who has the best proposals. Identify any additional funds needed, if any, to carry out your goals and the source of those funds. Be very specific. Another thing when we talk about in kind, identify other organizations that you work with or other resources that you have. A great example in New Mexico is we had a program called New Mexico Young Disability Leaders, and they created a disability awareness curriculum. They helped develop a lot of leaders in the community. We did a lot of work with the legislative disability awareness, and we did peer mentor and leadership training. Even though that project isn't ongoing now, that provided us with great resources for some of our other projects that we were proposing or that we wanted to work on. So we had some building blocks already in place from past projects. So don't hesitate to look at other projects that you've heard of or that people have worked on and see if you have maybe more than you think you do. You'd be surprised. Next slide, please. Now, of course, when we're talking about grants, we're talking about money, which includes budgets. It's basically a way to translate your program plan into dollars and cents. You have to be specific and reasonable at the same time. If you're not specific enough, the organization is going to wonder, why would I fund something if I don't know where exactly the money is going? Be reasonable, because once that budget goes in and if they approve your grant, they are going to expect you to follow that budget. So don't put in something that's unrealistic or that you think is going to be unattainable, because then you're going to be responsible for doing that. So make sure that you really sit down, think about what do we need, what can we reasonably expect to achieve, and how are we going to split this money up in a way that makes sense. Also, make sure to include in-kind donations as a valuable asset towards your total. And I mentioned one kind of in-kind donation. In-kind donations can also be, for example, some grants, maybe you can't pay for food or travel, or you can't pay for supplies, but you have an organization that is willing to provide those things. Make sure to include that in there, because it'll fill in gaps that they might think about as something that they wouldn't want to fund, but it's nice to know that it's there. You don't want to build a Lego tower. Well, let's put it this way. You can't build a tower if you have blocks missing at different levels. Sometimes those in-kind donations fill in as those blocks. Next slide, please.
So in our application components segment, we're going to keep talking about budgets. They're probably one of the most important pieces. And I wanted to mention, when people are looking at grants who are deciding whether or not to give you the money, they are scored just like a test. Question 1, you get 10 points. Question 2, you get 1 point. Question 3, it's 15 points. Each of these categories gets scored. So you get more points for a better answer for each question in each segment of this. So we want to get 100% on our test. So typical budget categories, and we're going to go into some detail here, is first item would be personnel. That's people who are working on this grant, working on the project. You're going to describe them in the grant that you're writing. There are 2 categories under personnel, which is salaries and benefits. A salary, when you work somewhere, you may be earning $10,000 a year, and they may be, I'm just using it as a round figure. I'm not saying that's what you're earning. If you earn $10,000 a year, you may be getting benefits like insurance or vacation days or something of that nature. That costs the company money. The individual might not get that in their pocket, but they're getting that benefit, and those benefits cost the company money. So when you put a salary in, if there are 0 benefits, you'd say no benefits. if the salary included benefits, you would want to write that in as a budget item. Because if you hire a project director who's a really big deal and they're earning $100,000 a year, they're going to be getting pretty good benefits, like maybe 2 weeks paid, well, maybe more than that at 100,000, 2 weeks paid vacation, you know, 10 days a year of sick leave, insurance, health insurance, you know, a company car, we'd like that. So all those things cost money. So the next item would be non-personnel items. That falls into things most of you may be more familiar with. I am. Supplies, materials, equipment, travel, consultants, etc. This consultant thing can get a little bit sticky because a consultant is not actually typically an employee. They are someone you go out and you get, you know, I'm consulting with someone to do my graphic design, but they're not my employee. They are an independent contractor, and other items that might be necessary in your project. Then next we have indirect costs. They're often used to cover outside administrative expenses. You know, that could be a variety of different things. It can be up to 15% of your budget, but it would not be your personnel, your non-personnel categories that we've just talked about. It can be also termed maybe miscellaneous. So it can be outside administrative expenses. Might be, for instance, you can't manage as your small organization $100,000. So you might have an organization that's going to receive the funds, and then you're going to make a check request to them, and then they're going to write that check and then pay your organization. That's sometimes called a fiscal receiver, or I forget the other term. Can someone throw that in? Fiscal receiver. It's also called
Fiscal agent.
Fiscal agent. Thank you, Lindsay. That's very helpful. So when they cut that check or give you that check, it costs them money to do that. They have to pay someone to do it. They have to put the stamp on the envelope. They have to buy the envelope. They have to have the checking account. That may cost $25. That would be considered an indirect cost. Okay, next slide, please. And this is going to get a little tricky because budgets are one of the biggest parts. We're going to look at a simple sample budget, and that's a tongue twister. What we have in front of us here is a sample spreadsheet. It's only a few lines. It's only 1, 2, 3. It's only 5 lines long. So we're just using 2 listings or 2 entries on this spreadsheet to show you what it would look like when you're writing a grant budget, because it has several columns. And we're showing you what a total how a total would be written, and then how we would divide that total up between the multiple columns. So in the first column, we have item heading. In the second column, the heading is requested amount. In the third column, we have the donated or in-kind parts. Because remember, nobody wants to be the only one supporting your project. Then in the next column, which is the fourth, we have the total amount. Because sometimes some of it's requested, some of it's donated in kind. So in our first entry, we have personnel costs. We have a project director at 50% of their time at $20,000 per year. Sometimes in a grant, you have someone who works in an organization. They're already getting paid by that organization, but they're going to take half their time and dedicate it to this project. It might be someone who works part-time, and by getting this grant, they can work full-time, and you can expand what you're doing. So if they're receiving $20,000 a year in a salary, under the column that says requested amount, we put in 50% of their salary, which is $10,000. We're asking the granting organization or agency to give us that whole $10,000. So that's in the requested amount. The next column over to the right, in donated in kind, is 0 because we are not providing that portion of their work. Under the next column in total amount, we have the $10,000. Going down to the next entry line is, just as an example, is non-personnel costs. We're using it as an example here, printing of handbooks. So under the subheading of non-personnel costs, we put printing, 100 handbooks at $10 each. Remember when Daniel said be specific and be reasonable? They are not going to fund you for a $100 for a handbook that can be copied for $10. If it has a DVD, if it has a, some special component to it, maybe it is $100. But what would you do then? 100 handbooks with interactive DVD. You may want to break it down to printing and then creating the audio materials. So printing 100 handbooks at $10 each. The requested amount that's going to be $1,000, but the requested amount is $500. That's half of it. Then the donated and in-kind column, which is the next one over to the right, is $500. So we have $1,000 total. Then the next one under non-personnel is office supplies. Our requested amount from them is $2,000. Our donated amount is $1,000. So our total amount on the far right is $3,000. Last line there under that is total. The requested amount is $12,500. The donated in-kind amount is $1,500. The total amount of those two added together going from left to right is $14,000. Very bottom line, always on your application, is the percentage of total. So under requested amount, we're requesting 88% of our project to come from the funder. The next column over, donated in-kind, we are providing 12% of the funding for our project. Then the next column, the total amount, the logical thing is 100%. I hope that's clear as mud. Next slide, please.
So we've covered a lot in the last couple of slides. So to give us a short review, be concise, to the point, and organized when you are getting your application together, because there's a ton of components as you've seen. Be specific and use examples. And when you're writing, make sure that you're easily understandable, as if you're speaking to someone that is completely unfamiliar with yourself as an organization and your project and the need and all the different pieces. Assume that the funder knows nothing. Also, it can be really helpful if it's allowed to include letters of support, because again, that's another way of proving that there are others that believe in your project. Next slide, please.
So on this slide, we have a pretty large stack of papers, which is very appropriate for our question, which is, which one is usually longer, a grant application or a proposal? You can answer 1 for a grant or 2 for a proposal.
So we have a blue slide. Go ahead. Go ahead, Lindsay.
I was just going to say, there's your screen, and you've got your question at the top and your 2 buttons that you can click on and your submit button. So have at it.
We have our choices of a grant. Is that longer? Or a proposal? Is that longer? And Teresa will give us our results under curtain number 3.
And we still have a few seconds here for folks to submit their answer.
Thank you.
And it would appear that a grant is our selection.
Thank you. So you guys are doing great. I think we're making our point, or you already knew all the information. Thank you. Next slide, please. So navigating grant applications, what happens after no? You get the big NO. That's tough. But you know what? You have a really good skeleton in what you've written for your grant application. There are 2 things that can happen. Either you went to the wrong source and your mission does not match theirs, or your application might not have been strong enough to compete with the other applications. So if you are rejected, politely ask for feedback and suggestions. Some grant agencies or organizations will answer this type of question. Some will not. If they will not, do not get angry. Do not push them. Go back, review, try and see who they funded, which in our last webinar, we showed you how to look up who gets the funding from what organizations and how much did they get and what was their project in very basic terms. They have to put it in their tax return. Every entity has to do a tax return, even organizations. And some, like for instance, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, they will give you feedback on how your grant was scored, how you did, and maybe sometimes they'll tell you ways you could improve it. They'll tell you you were the second runner-up, or you were down in the lower, there were 20 applicants and you were the lowest one. It's really helpful. They're very friendly. Next, if the feedback is positive on that, you didn't get it, the answer was no, try again in the next grant cycle. Your competition might have been very stiff. That competition might not be there next time, but try to improve your proposal. Show it to other people. Write it in terms as if no one has ever been introduced to that concept before. If you talk about bicycles, they don't even know it has two wheels, they don't know it has a frame, they don't know it has handlebars, and they don't know how to ride it. So you have to reinvent the wheel and tell them what is a bicycle. If it's not a match, move on. There's a lot more fish in the sea. Next slide, please.
Now, on the flip side, you hear yes, which is very exciting, but that's not the end, it's the beginning. What happens after yes? Deliver the program as described in your application. And it really is as described in the application. You'll have reports to do. Make sure you complete all of your reports and final reports on time. Spend the funds only as promised and return all unspent monies, because if you don't do these three things, one, you could get organizations very upset at you and make it harder to get future grants, or worst case scenario, if you don't deliver what you promised, they might actually stop providing you with money at all. So make sure to not just prepare for getting a yes on a grant, but prepare for delivering the program that you're writing about. And next slide.
Stay in touch with your funder. This is super, super important. And to make it fun, our graphic is a dog. It looks like a Jack Russell Terrier type dog, and it is typing on a laptop, and it's got some very studious looking glasses. He's typing out thank you letters to his funder. Next slide, please. Invite your funder to your event. I know we do this when we hold events here at DDPC. We will invite our sponsors. If they sponsor food for an event, we invite them to come. And they have come before and really enjoyed it. It makes friends to do that. Send your funder copies of any materials that you've made. They like to see where their money went. Send out thank you notes, and not just to the top dog, meaning to the boss of the organization that you got money from. Send it out to everybody. Everyone likes to see what their money is producing. We have a graphic in the bottom right-hand corner. It's a stack of envelopes of different colors, and the first one has a circle on the top with a dog paw in the middle. It's quite fun. Next slide, please.
So if you missed part 1, fundraising and fundraising, how to find grants and other opportunities, you can view it online anytime. It is available on the SWI website, Southwest Institute for Families. It is also available on YouTube. And there is, as I said earlier, captioning for that. It's available archived on the GoToMeeting site, but the address is very long and we're running out of time. So I'm going to just read the YouTube one. https://www.youtube.com/watch WATCH ? V as in Victor =, capital W, capital T, lowercase v, capital I, capital Z, lowercase u, capital U, lowercase AHS, and a 0. Next slide, please. So we have time for questions, just a couple minutes, because we've been explaining a lot of materials. So please feel free to ask questions. You'll need to unmute your mic in order to do that. Or you can contact us later by email. And we'll go to the next slide where Lindsay's going to share with you what our emails are and tell you about our logo. And then we'll open it up for questions. Because you can email us and ask us questions, and we'll try and help you out.
Yep, so our emails, we've got 2 of them. We have Nat's email. It is natdean@hubwest.com. Hub as in the hub of a wheel and west as in the direction.com. And then I've got 2 emails. The first one is warriorqueen4@gmail.com. WARRIORQUEEN4@gmail.com. Or my work email, which is lindsay.sloan@state.nm.us. So that's LINDSAY.S as in Sam, LOAN @state.nm.us. We've got logos. We've got our Allies for Advocacy logo, which is kind of bluish, and it's a roadrunner holding some chilies in his mouth, and it says, "If there's a will, there's a way." And then we have the New Mexico flag in the upper right, which is yellow, and it's got a red Via symbol across. And then our final graphic is in the lower left-hand corner, and it's a chalkboard, and it's got 2 + 2 = 4 with a little piece of chalk in the corner of that. And I'm hoping that this webinar was helpful for you all and has helped you get 2 + 2 = 4 when it comes to grants. Next slide, please.
So does anybody have a question that they'd like to answer? We have some nice comments. It says smart dog with a smiley face and a tongue hanging out. And then we have another comment. You all did a fantastic job explaining the specifics of proposal writing. And then I don't have any questions at the moment, but I just want to say what a great presentation, very informative, helpful. Thank you for giving examples of what you were presenting as well. So thank you for those comments from those who gave comments. Is there a question from anyone? I think we must have done a good job. So Daniel, would you like to give the next slide?
Sure. Okay, so thank you for your time and to Southwest Institute for this opportunity to share with you. Please be sure to fill out the short evaluation form after this webinar is over. It'll be sent to the email address you used to register. Your evaluation results are what allow us to continue bringing programs like this to you. It lets us know how we're all doing. So please take time
and
to
this
fill
is
that out.
a perfect example of this program is brought to you by a grant. And if we don't provide the evaluations, we don't get any funding in the future. Thank you. So Juliana, would you like to tell us who have been our funders? Obviously, we didn't rely on just one.
Teresa, you want to lead this one?
Sure. The Southwest Institute works on this project. It's called the Southwest Alliance for Technical Assistance Center. That's the name of the grant. Juliana Warina can be reached at www.huerena@swifamilies.org, and it's a collaboration with the Center for Self-Advocacy, the ARC of New Mexico, Parents Reaching Out, the Center for Developmental Disabilities, and the New Mexico Allies for Advocacy, the Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, the ACL, AUCD, the Association for University Centers for Developmental Disabilities, and the Developmental Disabilities Planning Council. We'd like to thank all of our supporters and funders and our presenters today. Thank you for a marvelous job. And thank you to SWI. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you everyone for coming.